Hi everybody, I hope you're keeping well. Thanks so much for tuning in and watching the video. The channel has been a smidge on the quiet side, quieter than I would like over the last couple of weeks. Not for any bad reason, I've just had some construction work, I guess, going on in the house, and it has made doing videos a bit awkward. So that's over, and we're back on what I hope will be a more regular uploady schedule. So today's video I want to talk about actually creating a warband. Now by that I mean list building, not kit bashing or sourcing miniatures or anything like that. We'll do that kind of stuff down the line. But I was having a look at the Facebook page and it really hammered home to me how many people are very new into the hobby and just don't have a huge amount of experience thinking about these things. So I thought looking at the absolute basics of building a warband would be a very good idea. Now, the first thing to discuss is, why are we building a warband? Ultimately, it's to play a game, but what are we hoping to get from that game? If you are very new to the hobby, and if this is your first ever war game, as it is for many people in the Trench Crusade community, I think worrying too much about min-maxing and the exact percentage chances of things occurring and all that kind of stuff, that's a bit down the line. It's not something that you need to worry about. I would suggest doing kind of a rule of cool to start, playing what you want to play, just having fun with it. There's two reasons to play any war game, any board game, any skirmish game, anything of that nature. The first one is to have fun, and the second one is to learn something. And there's no reason why you can't do both of those at once. They're not mutually exclusive things. Now, I would argue, and I could argue, I think, that once you get into the competitive scene, the fun kind of falls by the wayside in favor of simple efficiencies and min-maxing and things like that. And playing to win can be very fun. But sometimes when you're playing to win, it means you're playing a very boring game tactically and a bit of a boring list. So don't get mad at me for saying that. I'm very sorry, competitive players, but it's just something that I noticed when I was a competitive player. So let's approach this from the point of view of, we want to learn and we want to have fun. We don't want to min-max the shit out of our lists. So what we want to do, and what are common mistakes that I see people making when they're talking about their lists on the internet, be it Discord or Twitter or Facebook or wherever. The number one thing I've noticed is people lean too heavily into two schools of thought. They either want to have a very small list of super kitted out Rambo type people. Like, I've seen lists of people putting like 5 or 6 pieces of equipment on a yeoman, or they want to have a list where nobody has anything on them at all. They're barely even armed. I've seen lists of people having their lieutenant with just a bolt action, and like 17 other models or whatever it might be. So there is a middle ground to be considered here. And the middle ground will normally find itself if you just sit and consider, what am I doing with this list? What mission am I playing and who am I playing against? If you're playing something where you're going to be contesting numerous points on the map, 3+ points on the map, then yes, you probably want to start leaning into that extra yeoman, that extra trooper, that extra whatever is probably going to be a big deal and might just come in clutch. If you're doing something that's a bit more killy, especially if you need things to survive, then you might lean more into the heavily armed, heavily armored, high percentage chance of living type of list. You should really consider, what is the actual aim of the game. If it's to control a load of territory, you probably want a couple more people, but you never want so many people that very few of them are equipped with anything that's going to have a high percentage chance of effectiveness. And even if you are doing a very kind of a killy very kind of defensive. I really want to do well on my saves rolls. You never want to narrow it down so much that there's just not that many turns for you to take. There's not that many activations for you to make, and there's very limited decision making on the other side. Ultimately, when I am building a list, I am normally trying to build a list that I consider will be a small little bit disruptive. I'm not above saying I was a huge proponent of 2 artillery witches when 2 artillery witches were possible. Why? Because it was ridiculously disruptive. It wasn't about the damage that they did. I found in the games that I played that 2 artillery witches would normally be, let's call them, traumatically effective roughly every 2 turns. And that's not a tremendous payoff. But what they, whilst they wouldn't knock that many people out or do a tremendous amount of damage or even inflict a huge amount of blood markers sometimes, what they would do is just fuck with the opponent. They were just not able to do what it is that they wanted to do. And certain units in certain lists just almost have that built in. It is essentially the whole point of the unit is to just be a massive disruptor, something that absolutely must be dealt with or completely tactically moved around. One or the other. The easiest example, and the one I always go to, is an assault war beast. Those things are just, you have to do something. You can't just let them run roughshod over you. So it almost becomes you're losing turns to this mini objective that you're putting on the field and that you're controlling. You're stealing effectiveness and turns from your opposition. So there will be something on your list that does that very well in relation to the mission that you're playing and the people that you're playing against. And sometimes it's pretty standard. Like, I would consider an Anchorite Shrine to be right up there as one of those things. I would, as I said, the Assault Warwolf is definitely something I would consider one of those things. I would consider Assassins to be one of those things from the Sultanate, where you have to react to them. You have to plan for them. You have to take your eye off what it is that you want to do just to survive their presence and their impact in the game. So a lot of people I've noticed are not taking those units, and don't feel bad about it. It's simply because you're not experienced enough to identify what those units are. So what's the solution here? Across your first couple of games, I would suggest, even if you're not doing what you see is what you get, even if it means you're doing counts as stuff, as long as you have an acquiescent opponent, run everything. Play games with every unit. You don't need the models. Don't worry about that kind of stuff. Just like have your assassin count as something else for a game or whatever, and learn the units. Figure out what it is that they do. Figure out who has a chance of operating above or below their stat line, because those units also exist. I believe Stigmatic Nuns to be one of the finest examples of units who operate way above their stat lines, way above their cost. And it's hard to figure out what it is. It's some kind of conjunction of the unit rules and the faction rules and the game rules just mean they tend to swing a little harder and outperform their stats, which is pretty dope. So give yourself the opportunity to learn. Don't just run basic lists filled with basic units because you're leaving tactical disruption on the table, and then don't get too married to singular lists without kind of challenging your perspective of things and figuring all that out. So what are we talking about here? Ultimately, you've got, at the start of any campaign, you'll have 700 ducats. With those 700 ducats, I believe, this is just me and what I've picked up on tactically from the game, I believe you should be able to field an army that effectively can be broken up into 2 or even 3 highly effective units within that army. So you can have your elite units and your troops, and you should be able to break them out in such a way where their effectiveness plays well into each other, and they can be incredibly focused on their own individual goals within the turn. Generally speaking, not dismissing the idea tactically, because I know there's definitely cases for it, but generally speaking, just a bunch of yeomen, just a bunch of shock troopers, and a completely underarmed lieutenant are not going to get it done, because the lieutenant, he's ignoring a huge amount of his effectiveness. I've seen people taking just melee weapons on them and not bringing anything. I don't know why you would do that. I don't know why you would deny yourself the opportunity to shoot with something that can be killy from range. It doesn't make any sense to me. So I would always argue in favor of a medium-sized force, or something that can be built onto very quickly. If you take your, let's call them your elites, obviously, we'll use the Heretic Legions as an example here. Let's say you take your priest, your chorister, and your assault beast. You can have the chorister and the assault beast work ridiculously well together. I mean, almost terrifyingly well together, to the point where they can essentially split the map. And then you can have just a heretic priest going with whatever else, leading whatever those other troops are. That's what I mean. And then within that troop setup, you can have a further breakout if you want to. I've done it to the point where, kind of, obviously I was running the double artillery witches quite a bit, but when I wasn't running them, I would be running the heretic priest with a couple of troopers, the chorister and the war beast running together, and then I would have like a mishmash. Whatever I was fighting would dictate what else I was bringing, and that would form its own little unit. And then I would have those three operating independently, normally with the chorister assault beast just owning the middle of the table, and then backing up to left or right, whatever it was they needed to do. And you can get a reasonable model count and reasonable efficiencies going for 700 ducats. You do not need to over-index into a 5-unit, horribly expensive, definitely going to start rolling morale checks after 2 or 3 rounds army. And you also don't need to over-index into like 12 or 13 models, which I'm seeing people genuinely try to do, and I disagree with. So stick to a medium model count. You can build on very quickly in a campaign circumstance. You can very quickly start stapling on some cheaper units onto your force. It's not a problem. Experiment with your models, learn all your model types, play a bunch of one and done games, and just like one shots with people in different scenarios with different units, into and out of different combinations and different factions, and just learn. Just approach those early games from the point of view of learning. It's less about what you build in the early stages of learning any game, and it's more about why you're building it, which brings us back to the very first point of you're building to learn and you're building to have fun. Because if you don't learn, you'll never win. If you don't have fun, you'll never want to learn. So that's it. That's really all I can think of. Now, I know with these topics, people always want some kind of a cheat sheet, and there is none. There's no unit lists that I can give you that are just going to win for you, because a good list will lose if you play a bad game with it. If you don't pay attention, if you're not thinking tactically, if you're giving up the small wins to the opponent, if you're not pushing them with blood markers when you need to interrupt their efficiencies, you're just not going to win. And this is all stuff that you need to learn over time. That is potentially even more important than the makeup of your army. I feel like a good list and a bad player lose 95% of the time. And I feel like a bad list and a good player will win 95% of the time. So yeah, there you go. That's everything for this video. The STLs are close, folks. So soon we're going to start having painting videos arriving on the channel, and I'm really excited about that. I've actually bought like a new tripod so that I can use my really good camera instead of my document camera, and I can do hopefully some nice painting videos for you all. I've got Hand of Fate Part 3 on the way. I've got a kind of a surprise story on the way, which is going to be kind of fun and cool, and yeah, just lots of fun stuff. We're barreling past the subs count that I thought we would be at. I was just checking out an older video of mine yesterday. I think I was checking up something I had said, and I was hoping to be about 42k by Christmas, and we might just be 50 by New Year's, which would be sick and insane. And thank you all so much for the support on the channel and the kind words on the channel. And just like, I'm just here to enjoy Trench Crusade and have fun. That's what I want to do. I don't want to caught up in any other kind of silliness or anything like that. I just want this to be a fun channel where we talk about games and whatnot. And for the most part, 99% of people are really cool with that. So dope. So yeah, that's it. I'm going to stop waffling now. It's been a minute, so there's some waffle. So as always, thank you all so much for watching. August, slán go fóill.